My son ignored me for 20 years. Then, the week the front page said I cleared $14.7 million, he invited me to Christmas like nothing ever happened. Under the porch lights, I arrived with a thick envelope and a steady smile. He saw inheritance, bank accounts, salvation. I brought something else. Tonight I'd turn their greed on itself, and the only gift under their tree would be justice. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat alone in the kitchen of my little house in Lincoln, the kettle clicking on the stove as snow piled up against the windowsill. The room smelled faintly of coffee grounds and old pine wood. On the table in front of me sat a family picture frame, some unpaid utility bills yellowing at the edges, a thin file folder I had not opened in years, and a folded newspaper announcing the jackpot winner. That winner was me. I should have felt triumph or freedom, but instead, a knot of anger and betrayal pulled tighter in my chest. It wasn't the money that bothered me, not really. It was how quickly it drew out voices I hadn't heard in decades, voices that had been silent when I needed them most. I thought back to all the sacrifices I had made for my son Caleb. When he was accepted to college, tuition alone cost me $65,000. I scraped every corner of my savings, canceled vacations, and worked overtime at the plant just so I could write that check each semester. I told myself it was worth it, that his future mattered more than my comfort. I remembered the sedan I bought for him, a silver one with clean leather seats, $24,000 at the dealership. I figured he needed reliable wheels to get to his internship, and I wanted him to feel secure, supported. Then came his wedding, a day I thought would be filled with joy and unity. I ended up footing $35,000 of the expenses. The reception hall, the floral arrangements, even the open bar, it all came from my pocket because I believed, foolishly, that generosity would keep our family bonded. I told myself if I gave enough, love would stay. Looking now at the receipt tucked behind the old graduation photo, I whispered under my breath, "Son, I skipped my dinners for years just to cover your student loans." My voice cracked in the empty room. That photo of Caleb in his cap and gown grinned back at me, frozen in time, unaware of the years ahead where silence would replace gratitude. The house itself carried memories like scars. It was a one-story place worth about $230,000 today, though no money could measure its true weight. I had laid the wooden floors with my own hands, every plank cut and nailed during weekends when Marissa, my wife back then, brought me lemonade. Above the fireplace sat our wedding picture, taken in 1980, when smiles came easily and we thought life would always be kind. Now I stood in that same living room sometimes, running my fingers along the photo frame, remembering a woman who no longer walked these halls. I had nearly lost the house after the divorce. I could still feel the tightness in my chest when the savings account balance dipped below $2,000. The bank's envelope still sat in a drawer in the kitchen, the ink smudged, but the fear was written enough in my memory. To think that Caleb, the same boy whose toys once scattered across this floor, would plot with his wife to sell this home and tuck me away in some nursing facility. It twisted everything inside me. A house that carried laughter, arguments, holidays, and quiet nights was nothing but dollar signs to him now. The silence of the years weighed heavily than the snow outside. 20 Christmases passed without the sound of my son's voice filling the air. The phone rang mostly from telemarketers, their pitches breaking into my dinners, while the birthday cards I sent were returned unopened. I kept one envelope, the one that came back with "Return to Sender," stamped in red, as if to remind me that my love had no address. There was the heart surgery, the long, sterile nights at the hospital when I lay in recovery, staring at the empty chair beside me. No hand reached for mine. No voice said, "Dad, you'll be okay." Instead, machines beeped rhythmically, keeping me alive when family should have been there. Sometimes in the kitchen, I found myself whispering as if Marissa could hear me, as if the woman I once loved might somehow answer. If we hadn't been so proud, would Caleb have turned out different? The question floated into the hum of the refrigerator, unanswered, but it hung there all the same. I wrestled with guilt, grief, and a loneliness so deep it echoed inside the walls. Then came the article. $14.7 million after taxes, they wrote in bold print. My name, my town, my winnings. Within 2 days, the phone rang. Caleb's voice, calm, too casual. Dad, Christmas at our place this year? He said it like 20 years hadn't passed, like there was no canyon of silence between us. The words, family time, slipped from his lips with all the warmth of a business transaction. I held the phone in my hand long after the call ended, staring at the bill from Casey's gas station where I had bought the ticket. My teeth pressed into my lip until it bled slightly. Sweetness does not return after decades of rot. His timing was too perfect, too sharp. Love doesn't show up when the jackpot lands. Love should have been there on cold hospital nights, on lonely birthdays, in the cracks of life's ordinary days. His sudden interest smelled of interest rates and compounded greed, not affection. Yet something stirred inside me that surprised even myself. The money wasn't power. The real power was choice. For the first time in decades, I realized I wasn't desperate to belong. I didn't need to sit at anyone's table out of pity or pretend forgiveness. I flipped open the thin folder on the kitchen table. Inside were rental agreements from 2012, notes of the cash flow I had managed from small investments. Quite proof that I had been standing on my own long before luck struck. I ran my fingers across the papers and felt a steadiness rise in me. They think I'm desperate to belong, I muttered, but I'm not. The kettle clicked off behind me, steam hissing like a quiet applause. I looked at the photos on the mantel again, at Maurice's frozen smile. I've been strong enough without them, I whispered, not sure if I was telling her, or myself, or both. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The night stretched on, the snow still falling, but my thoughts grew sharper. On the table, I placed Richard Davenport's business card, the lawyer who had handled a neighbor's estate. His name glowed faintly in the light. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank, asking for Aaron Shaw. I inquired about the procedures for freezing suspicious transfers, my voice steady as if I were simply paying a bill. Each answer she gave me stitched another piece of control back into my hands. After I hung up, I opened the recorder app on my phone. I pressed record and spoke quietly into the microphone. If they come for money, they'll come in their own words. My thumb lingered on the button, then I saved the file. It was a small decision, almost invisible, but it shifted something monumental inside me. For the first time since betrayal showed its face, I felt ready not just to endure, but to act. The kitchen clock ticked. Snowflakes outside softened the world, but inside me, resolve was hardening. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning of my turn. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke up before dawn that morning, the kind of hour when the house is quiet and the only sound is the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The winter air pushed cold against the window panes, and I wrapped my robe tighter, moving slowly toward the desk in my study. My hands trembled a little, but not from age, not from weakness. They trembled from clarity. The betrayal was no longer a shadow at the edge of my mind. It was here. It was real. It was sharp as glass. The child I had carried, the son I had raised, the family I had poured decades into, had chosen to treat me not as blood, not as father, but as a vault to be emptied. The realization in Chapter 2 had nearly crushed me, but by now that grief was transforming into something else. Resolve. I sat down, opened my leather planner, and flipped to a fresh page. Today, I told myself, I move from knowing to doing. The first call I placed was to Davenport, my lawyer of 30 years. His voice came through the receiver, calm and steady, the same voice that had carried me through contracts business sales, and the estate planning that built the very foundation my children were now circling like vultures. "Morning, Charles," he said. "Davenport," I answered, forcing my tone to remain firm. "I need you to verify every piece of property, every account, every title in my name. I want nothing overlooked. And draft me a legal warning, something we can send if anyone pressures me into signing over authority. Power of attorney, transfer documents, anything of that sort. I want it ready." "Understood," he replied. "You're expecting pressure soon?" I closed my eyes. The memory of Caleb's casual hints, Marissa's thin smile, their eagerness to know about my accounts. It was all there. "Yes," I said. "Sooner than you'd think." I hung up, and before the silence could sink in, I dialed Erin at the bank. Erin had been the branch manager for over a decade. She remembered my late wife's favorite chocolates. She knew the grandchildren's names. More importantly, she knew me, not just my money. "Erin," I said, "I need a flag on every account. If anyone tries to move more than $10,000 without me standing right there, you stop it." "Done," she said without hesitation. "We'll require in-person verification. No phone calls, no proxies, nothing slips through." Her certainty gave me breath. I thanked her, hung up, and leaned back. My net worth sat mostly in municipal bonds and index funds, $9.2 million, steady, deliberate, built over a lifetime of late nights and early mornings. To my children, it seemed bottomless. To me, it was fragile, a legacy to protect. That morning's first steps were not just transactions. They were a line in the sand. I thought that would give me peace. Instead, it set the stage for the ambush. Caleb called just after lunch, his voice warm, too warm. "Dad," he said, "Marissa and I thought maybe you could come by the house this evening. Just us. We want to catch up. Haven't done that in a while." There was a pause where my heart wanted to believe him. My mind, sharper now, recognized the script. Still, I said yes. When I arrived at their house, the table was set, not with food, but with printouts, charts, and a glossy deck of slides. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. Marissa greeted me with a hug too tight, her perfume sharp. Caleb waved toward the table like a salesman proud of his wares. "Dad, sit," he said, gesturing to the chair directly across from the papers. "We've been working on something big, huge return potential, family only." I sat, I looked. Bar graphs climbed. ROI percentages screamed across the page, 500% in 18 months. Marissa's voice slid into the pitch, smooth as glass. "If you truly care about family," she said, her eyes steady on mine. "You invest?" The word struck me like a slap. Care about family? I thought of 20 Christmases, 20 birthdays, 20 Thanksgivings passed in silence, with not a single phone call, not a single knock on the door. And now, family meant capital. I leaned back, letting the fury rise slowly and coldly. 20 Christmases, I said softly. Not one call, not one, and now I'm just a bank? The silence after my words was heavy. Caleb shifted. Marissa's smile faltered, but they pressed on, selling, insisting, piling phrases like bricks. I heard none of it. My mind had already recorded what mattered. Family reduced to a transaction. Love translated into ROI. That was the first climax of betrayal, sharp enough to draw blood, but not deep enough to kill. It prepared me, hardened me, for what would come next. The following morning I dialed Caleb. My voice was steady, though every word scraped. "Crypto wiped me out," I told him. "Everything. It's gone." A pause. Then, with barely disguised calculation, Caleb said, "Then maybe skip Christmas this year." In less than 5 minutes, the invitation vanished. No warmth, no protest, just an efficient erasure. I wrote one word in my notebook, confirmed. The next step was investigation. I called old contacts in Lincoln, men I'd known from business deals, golf courses, and late-night conferences. Within hours, whispers turned to facts. Caleb owed between $1.9 and $2 million, leased luxury cars, endless restaurant bills, public relations stunts that bled cash. His empire was built on borrowed time, borrowed money, and if he had his way, borrowed blood. Mine. That evening, Caleb called again. His voice was eager, desperate under the surface. "Dad, listen. There's a deal. 300,000 secures it before Christmas. It's for the grandkids, you understand? It sets them up for life." I pressed the record button on my phone, voice memo blinking red. "You already set up my answer," I said under my breath, though I kept my actual reply neutral. The call ended, and I stared at the glowing number. 300,000. A drop in my ocean, but to him a lifeline. I turned to the physical evidence. Deeds, insurance policies, bond ETF statements. Every page I spread across the desk was a piece of armor. Davenport called back that night. "If they push power of attorney," he said, "we'll serve a notice of revocation immediately. And I've drafted a no-contact order for financial harassment. All we need is your signature." "Have it ready," I said. By now the house was dark, the clock near midnight. I should have been exhausted, but my blood felt electric. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I was not drifting. I was steering. The final act of the night was quiet but decisive. I opened my laptop, composed an email to Victor Dalton, a venture capitalist I knew had crossed paths with Caleb. In simple words, I laid out Caleb's current residence, the evidence of debt, and the trail of excess. Then, with equal care, I typed a message to Kelly Hines, a journalist who never ignored a scandal when it landed in her inbox. "You'll want this story," I wrote. Before shutting the laptop, I whispered aloud into the empty room. "They think they know the game. They don't know I built the board." If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 2 below to let me know you're here with me. I had told myself in the quiet of the night, back when Chapter 3 ended in my mind, that there would be no turning back. I had already made the calls, already passed along the documents, already tied my name to the storm that was about to break open. I had imagined that it would be a slow burn, a waiting game, maybe weeks before anything took hold. But the world has a way of accelerating once the truth is stirred. And now I could feel it moving under my feet, a tide so strong it threatened to sweep away not only Caleb and Marissa, but me as well. It began with Dalton, the venture capitalist who had first warned me that Caleb's dealings were raising red flags. Dalton's voice had always been calm, calculated, a man who measured each word like currency. But that morning, his voice carried a sharp edge when he called me. "We are moving forward with litigation," he said, matter-of-factly. "I'll need everything you have on him, address, phone numbers, social accounts, all of it. My team is building a case." I could hear the scratch of a pen on his desk as he jotted down notes. I gave him what he asked for, slowly, carefully, almost ceremonially, like handing over weapons to an army. I felt both relief and dread, because once those details were in his hands, there was no way to pull them back. Dalton didn't play games. He didn't bluff. He moved like a blade, silent until the strike. Within days, a coalition had formed: Perez, Whitman, Chang, private investors who had each lost money in Caleb's schemes. They joined forces, pooling lawyers, filing papers, and requesting emergency motions. I had thought they might hesitate, but no, their fury was fuel. They marched forward, and I was swept along with them. And still I had my pile of evidence. The photos, the receipts, the contradiction between Caleb's claims of empty accounts and his spending at high-end restaurants, his flashy car leases, the gold watch that gleamed on his wrist when he hugged me last Christmas. I scanned the documents late into the night, the blue glow of my printer light pulsing in the dark room. Each page that slid into the folder felt like a nail in his coffin, and yet my heart trembled because this was my son. My son. But Caleb wasn't the only one with secrets. When I heard whispers about Marissa's supposed illness, the pieces finally began to shift into place. For years, she had spoken of her cancer treatments, her chemotherapy sessions, her battles with fatigue. People sent cards, flowers, and donations. Caleb used those stories as shields, telling investors that money was thin because medical bills come first. I had defended her, comforted her, believed her. I had sat across the kitchen table while she claimed to feel sick, offering tea and soup, wiping tears from her cheeks. But now I needed proof. I drove myself to St. Elizabeth's Hospital on a gray, icy morning. The parking lot was slick with frozen rain, my breath visible in the air as I walked toward the sliding doors. Inside, the air was too warm, the smell of antiseptic clinging to every surface. I asked for records, for verification, anything that could confirm Marissa's treatments. My hand shook as I handed over a written request, the words feeling heavier than any weight I had carried in months. Janice Moore, a woman I had known loosely through church, worked in the records department. She looked at me with hesitation, her voice low. "You know I can't disclose confidential files." "I'm not asking for details," I whispered, leaning closer, my eyes burning. "I just need to know if she was ever treated here. For 5 years, she's been telling us this story." 5 years? Janice pressed her lips together. After a long pause, she glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "There's nothing. No oncology visits, no chemo, not once in the last 5 years. The words cracked through me. I felt my knees weaken, my hand gripping the counter. Nothing. No record. No cancer. I left the building in a fog, the cold wind cutting across my face. My car felt like a coffin as I sat behind the wheel, staring at the steering column, unable to move. My mind replayed every memory. Every night Caleb had insisted Marissa couldn't join us for dinner because of her treatments. Every holiday where she had held her stomach and moaned every time I had prayed for her health. Lies. All of it. That night, I sent the files, the confirmed absence of medical records, to Kelly Hines at Channel 8. She was a local reporter I trusted, one who chased stories of fraud and injustice. Her reply came quickly, sharper than I expected. "This is huge. We'll run this." I hesitated before pressing send on the full packet of documents. My conscience gnawed at me. Crossing lines had never been my way, but the voice inside me whispered what I finally admitted aloud. I don't like crossing lines. But this time, the line crossed good people first. I thought exposing Marissa would be the end of it. That truth would stand tall enough to stop everything. But betrayal has a way of multiplying, of birthing new shadows in the corners you thought were clear. 2 mornings later, I opened my mailbox and froze. An envelope, unmarked, no return address, sat on top of the usual stack of bills. Inside, glossy photographs of Caleb at a party spilled into my hands. He was laughing, drink in hand, arms wrapped around strangers. Written in messy black ink on the back of one photo were the words, "His father hit $14.7 million, guess he's covering for him." My heart pounded, my chest burned. The implication was clear. People thought I was complicit, that I was shielding him, maybe even sharing in his schemes. The phone rang before I could even sit down. A voice, male, furious, spat through the line. "Either you pay what he stole, or you're part of it." I stammered, tried to explain, but the man cut me off with curses, accusations, threats. When the line went dead, I stared at the receiver in my hand. It felt like a block of ice, heavy and dead. I walked to the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall thick, blanketing the street, muffling the world in white silence. My reflection in the glass looked old, tired, broken. But then something shifted inside me. I whispered the word aloud, my breath fogging the window. "Enough!" I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white, and I knew that was the turning point. No more waiting, no more hoping. It was time to strike. Dalton's lawyers moved swiftly. They filed an emergency motion, freezing Caleb's accounts before he could drain them further. A subpoena was issued for his emails and financial records. The wheels of justice spun fast now, each turn pulling him deeper into the gears. At the same time, Channel 8 prepared its broadcast. The headline alone made me shiver. Local Woman's Cancer Fund under scrutiny. The community that had rallied around Marissa, sending casseroles and checks, would soon see her lies laid bare. I imagined her face when the story aired, the way her world would collapse in the court of public opinion before it ever hit a courtroom. But I wanted my strike, something personal, something that would leave no doubt. I printed every file, every photo, every receipt, and slipped them into a thick envelope. On the front, I wrote in bold black ink, "For Christmas Eve." I tucked it into my leather satchel, the weight of it both terrifying and satisfying. It would be my gift, my truth, delivered at the very table where they had once smiled at me and plotted behind my back. The night before Christmas Eve, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the house quiet except for the ticking clock. My computer screen glowed as I typed my final email to Kelly Hines. Attached was the full dossier, a link to every piece of evidence I had gathered. I hovered over the button, my finger trembling, then pressed send. A strange calm washed over me. It was done. I picked up the phone and called Davenport, my attorney. He answered with his steady drawl. I told him plainly, "If any power of attorney documents show up at dinner tomorrow, I walk out. You serve them next." There was silence on the line, then a low chuckle. "Fair enough. We'll be ready." Midnight came, the clock in my living room chiming each hour with a hollow echo, and snow pressed against the windows, muting the world outside. I stood at the door, looking out at the still night, and whispered to myself, "The only thing I'll bring is the truth." And as I turned off the lights, climbing the stairs to bed, I knew that tomorrow, the family dinner, the supposed celebration, would not be a feast. It would be a trial, one no courtroom could stage better than the raw light of betrayal exposed at a holiday table. I did not sleep much that night. My dreams were tangled with voices, with Caleb shouting, Marisa crying, lawyers hammering fists on desks. But when the morning came, I rose steady, calm, and ready. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. Christmas Eve used to be a soft night in my memory, a night of candlelight and old carols, a night where the living room smelled like pine and cinnamon. That year, it felt like a courthouse. I could feel the weight of it as I drove across slick Lincoln streets in my old Honda, the heater rattling, the wipers ticking back and forth. I kept a steady hand on the wheel and a steady breath in my chest. I had already made my choices. I had already done what needed doing. There is a kind of quiet that comes after you've told the truth to yourself. It sat with me in that car like an old friend. Their subdivision rose out of the snow like a new development always does. Clean lines, bright LEDs, big windows that show more than they hide. I pulled up along the curb and just looked. The house was trying hard. You could see it from the street. Lights wrapped around the gutters, blinking out of sync. An inflatable snowman is leaning to one side. The lawn was covered in snow, but somebody had run a shovel straight down the middle, like a part in a haircut, and left the rest wild. It was money without care. It was shining without warmth. Caleb opened the door before my knuckles found the wood. He had that smile he wears when he's selling something, the one that starts at the teeth and never reaches the eyes. "Dad, we're so glad you came," he said, and he looked past me to the worn leather satchel hanging from my shoulder. Not a glance for my face, not a glance for the cold. Just that bag. I knew what he was seeing. He was counting bills that were never inside it. Marisa drifted in behind him, a glass of wine like an accessory, the kind of dress that tries to say success out loud. She glanced up and down my coat, the scuffed boots, and tilted her head. "You look prosperous," she said, and she made it sound like a question and an accusation at the same time. I set the satchel on their glossy console table. I took off my coat and smoothed the sleeve. I smiled back with a calm I had earned the hard way. We made small talk for a few minutes that felt like hours. They told me about the neighborhood, about a couple 2 streets over who hosted a brunch with a private chef, about a man at the gym who founded a startup that might go public any day. I nodded. I let them fill the space with noise. I let them think this was another scene they could direct. The dining room was dressed up for the part. Good china, gold chargers, the crystal that rang when you touched it, a roast on the table that looked pretty and tasted like a photo. The surface of everything in that house shone, but when you set a hand on any of it, there was no depth, no history, just reflections of things that didn't matter. I ate a little to be polite. I listened more than I spoke. Then the knock came. 3 quick raps, not neighborly, official. It sounded like a gavel from the other side of the door. Caleb set his napkin down and walked out of the room. His steps were careful, like even he knew something was about to break. From my chair, I could hear the words as clearly as if the man stood beside me. "You've been served." The phrase lands the same way every time. It has the finality of a door closing. Caleb came back white as the snow on the front walk. He tore open the envelope with the rude speed of panic. Marissa leaned in with her wine glass hovering midair. Their eyes moved down the pages. All the air went out of the room. Multi-party lawsuit, asset freeze, fraud allegations, claims stacked to the tune of about $1.9 million. Those words don't just read, they ring. They rang around the chandelier and rattled the crystal. "How did they find me?" he asked. He meant, how did the law find him? How did the people he owed find him? How did the truth find him? It was all the same question. "Consequences have a GPS," I said, my voice steady. "They do. They always do. You can change your phone number, your email, and your address. You cannot hide from what you do." Marissa's phone buzzed like a hornet nest in her hand. She glanced down and sucked in air. Her thumb moved fast, but the notifications kept coming. The headline was bright and bold. "Lincoln woman exposed for fake cancer fund." It was her name beneath it. It was her face in the photo. It was her words, copied from emails and texts, laid out beside bank records and dates. The comments poured in as if a dam had broken. "Refund." "Scammer." "So, what kind of person does this?" Her hand shook until the phone slid onto the table like a little plate of truth she couldn't carry. Caleb turned on her the way a man turns when the lifeboat he planned to use has a hole. "You just buried us," he said, and the edge in his voice was something I had heard before when he talked to waiters and clerks he thought were beneath him. "Someone hacked," she cried, but even she didn't sound convinced. The words crumbled in the air between them. She looked at me then with eyes that tried to turn me into a solution. "Franklin, you said a surprise." Caleb stepped forward, hands open like he was offering a prayer. "Dad, 300,000 gets us lawyers, PR, time to breathe. We can fight this. The article will blow over. It always does if you shout loud enough." I stood, slid my arms into my coat, and picked up the satchel. My voice was plain. It didn't need to be loud. "I delivered your surprise already." My boots knew the path to the door. Behind me, I heard the clink of glass and the soft break of porcelain. Panic has a sound. It is not loud at first. It is scattered. I didn't turn around. The snow met me with quiet. I stepped into it and felt the night wrap me up, not cold, but clean. The days that followed unfolded like someone had finally taken a tight knot and pulled the right string. Dalton called me at 9 the next morning. He has a voice like a good pair of shoes, practical and well-kept. "Franklin, the freeze order is in place. The judge signed it after lunch yesterday. Accounts, credit lines, anything with his name is on hold. He won't move a dime until the court says so." Perez sent the PDFs with all the markers, stamps, and seals. I opened each file and read every line, not out of curiosity, but out of completion. It mattered to see the words properly. It mattered to honor the process that protects people when families fail them. By midweek, the repossession truck had taken the leased SUV. A neighbor filmed it with the shameless eye of a person who lives more through a screen than a window. 2 days later, a listing popped up online for a designer sofa, barely used. The coffee table was next, the watch after that. I could tell which pieces were Marissa's favorites by the way the descriptions reached for adjectives. The market does not care about adjectives. It cares about condition and price and whether you've burned through all your goodwill. The district attorney's office made contact with her on a Thursday. Somebody posted a screenshot of the voicemail, the official county number displayed at the top like a stamp of reality. She did not post another denial after that. The silence became its confession. I drove past their house once in January because I needed to see the shape of where we had been. The front walk had not been shoveled. The porch light flickered the way a tired bulb flickers when it wants to be replaced. Certified envelopes sat like a little wall by the door. Legal documents, stamped in red, is a phrase that has a presence of its own. Through the bay window, I could see the living room echoed, empty spots where pride used to sit. A week later, Tom Harrison called. He and I have known each other since the factory. He went to law school at night, took the bar with 2 babies in the house, and built a practice out of nothing but the belief that a person can change the road he walks on. Hearing set for the second week of January, he said. Fraud counts, misrepresentation, a motion to compel on the documents they refuse to turn over. It's going to be a long morning for them. I thanked him and then sat with the phone in my hand for a minute longer than I needed to. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't gloating. I was just letting it be real. And me? I made some changes that seemed small to anyone else and felt like a new life to me. I took a long look at my house and realized I had been keeping it like a museum to a time I no longer lived in. I had replaced the faucet and tightened the door hinges myself last fall, and I loved those small fixes, but every room felt heavy with old arguments and long silences. So I called a realtor who specialized in selling quietly. We walked through the rooms. She asked about measurements and roofs and the age of appliances, and I answered from a place of simple honesty. No pitch, no polish. The offer came from a local foundation that maintained affordable rentals for seniors and funded adult literacy in the city. It wasn't a grand number, $235,000, clean. I signed without clutching. I did not feel like I was losing something. I felt like I was letting something go that had already gone. I moved to a second-floor apartment not far from Pioneers Park. The building is older, with hallways that smell faintly like lemon cleaner, the good kind, the kind caretakers use because they take pride in shiny banisters. My living room has a view of bare trees in winter and kids chasing each other in spring. My kitchen is small but square, with space for a coffee pot, a loaf of bread, and the newspaper. The first morning there, I made toast and stood by the window. The sun hit the snow and turned it into tiny mirrors, and I thought, this is enough. I drove the Honda the way you drive a faithful thing, with respect. The roads through Pioneers Park curve like a slow thought. I walked the trails after a light snowfall and listened to the crunch of my boots. There's a bench by the pond with a plaque dedicated to a woman named Helen who taught school for 40 years. I sat there and pictured her voice reading to a class of second graders. It made me smile. The Adult Literacy Center sits in a low brick building near the bus line. I met the director, a woman who still writes thank you notes by hand. I filled out a volunteer form and wrote a check for $5,000. It felt right to start with that number. It felt right to start with quiet help. I sat at a table with a man my age who never got past 3rd grade. He read a paragraph slowly, stumbled, paused, tried again, and looked up like he was ashamed of the time it took. I told him the truth. There's no clock on dignity. He smiled. We kept reading. Back home, I stood at my window and said the words I had been carrying for weeks. I don't need their apology. I needed my life back. I let the words drop into the air like pebbles into water, and I watched the rings widen. I said it again, softer. I needed my life back. And I had it. Caleb called only once. The voicemail landed in the evening when the apartment was quiet and the radiator hissed in that soft way old radiators do. His voice was small, then urgent, then small again. He used the word sorry, and I believe he thought he meant it. He said he wished we could start over. He said he missed me. He said, maybe you could help us this one time, and the hinge of the whole message was right there, on that word, help. I listened all the way through, and then I pressed delete. A man can forgive from a distance. A man can love his child and still choose not to hand him the knife again. Marissa never called. She went quiet on every platform she once used as a stage. Sometimes silence is a mercy. Sometimes it is the only responsible thing left to do. The lawsuit kept moving like a freight train that had finally found its track. Dalton sent me updates in steady, practical emails. A consent order here, a discovery response there, numbers attached to exhibits, signatures under penalties of perjury. It is not glamorous, justice. It is paperwork and patience. It is also a blessing when the river of it runs for you and not against you. The asset freeze held. The court appointed a receiver to collect what could be collected. Money does not care who cries over it. It returns to the ledger where it belongs. There was a moment in late January when I felt a tremor of the old ache. I was in the grocery store, picking up eggs and coffee, when I saw a woman from their neighborhood. She knew me by face, not by name. She started to walk toward me, then stopped, then walked toward me again. "I'm sorry about your family," she said, not unkindly, but with that nosy tilt people get when they want a story. I told her I hoped everyone learned what they needed to learn and kept moving. I paid cash. I carried my bag to the car and sat there a minute with my hands around the steering wheel until the feeling passed. The past will try to climb back into the car with you if you let it. You have to keep the doors locked. In February, Tom called after a hearing. They tried to argue the articles poisoned the well, he said. The judge reminded them that bank statements speak louder than headlines. He chuckled, then sobered. "Frank, you did the right thing. Sometimes the only way to keep peace is to make a little noise first." I thanked him and walked the long hallway back to my front door, feeling lighter than I had in months. I started new routines that made the day feel clean. I brewed coffee at 6 and read the letters page in the paper. I took short drives to nowhere just to hear the engine hum. I bought a used paperback for $2 that smelled like a basement and underlined lines that felt true. I cooked stews that I ladled into containers and brought to the center for the evening tutors who came straight from work. Giving people something warm on a cold night is a kind of prayer you can hold. On Sundays, I went to a church with a choir that sang with more heart than pitch. And that's the kind I like. One morning, the pastor said, "Forgiveness is not letting someone hurt you again. Forgiveness is letting the hurt stop with you." I sat with that sentence the whole week. I wrote it on a slip of paper and taped it inside the kitchen cabinet where I keep the coffee filters. I kept making small choices that were mine alone. I put my accounts into a trust with instructions that protected me from anyone trying to act in my name. I met with a young financial planner who didn't try to impress me with jargon and simply explained what was safe and what was greedy. I learned the peace that comes from telling your future self, "I've got you." Meanwhile, the world around Caleb and Marissa got smaller. A friend of a friend mentioned they had moved into a rental across town. No more showy neighborhood, no more brunches with strangers who were only there to be seen. I heard that Caleb sold some of his watches at a pawn shop that appraised the shine and ignored the story. I heard that Marissa took down photos that used to gather hearts by the hundreds. You cannot eat hearts. You cannot pay rent with likes. I did not hate them. I would not waste one more beat of my own heart on hate. I wanted them to walk through whatever they needed to walk through and come out the other side as people who could tell the truth to themselves. Whether they did or not was no longer my assignment. When I missed something, it surprised me. It wasn't a person I missed. It was a sound. It was the sound of laughter at a table when nobody wanted anything, when nobody was measuring who brought more. I found a version of that sound at the center on a Wednesday when a woman in her 70s read a line without stumbling for the first time and slapped the table and whooped like she was 20. Everyone laughed. I laughed so hard my eyes watered. It felt like a part of me clicked into place that had been loose. Late winter gave way to a slow, muddy spring the way it always does here. The park thawed. Geese argued with each other like old married couples in the grass. I kept walking. I kept showing up at the center. I kept cooking. I kept saying no to anything that smelled like manipulation, and yes to anything that smelled like peace. A letter came from the Neighborhood Association in March. It was printed on plain paper with a little acorn in the corner. "Join our spring volunteer team," it said. "We need folks to plant flowers along the path by the pond, to repaint the benches, to organize a book swap in the pavilion." I read it twice and then set it on the table where I could see it every time I walked by. I didn't rush. I let the idea sit. I liked the feeling of being wanted for my hands and my time, not for my wallet. Caleb left one more voicemail. It was shorter. "Dad, I know I messed up. I know I broke something. I'm trying." He didn't ask for money that time. He didn't ask for anything. I sat in my chair and listened and felt the odd ache that is love and boundary braided together. I said out loud to the empty room, "I hope you learn what you need," and I pressed delete. A father can bless a son without opening his door. I cleaned the satchel I had carried on Christmas Eve. I rubbed conditioner into the leather with a soft cloth until it shone in a quiet way. I put inside it only what I use at the center: 2 sharp pencils, a legal pad, a paperback, and a small packet of tissues for the times when a sentence breaks someone open. It felt good to give the bag a new purpose. I stopped by the old house one last time before the foundation took possession. I walked through empty rooms that echoed and touched the wall where the wood had worn smooth by decades of hands, finding balance on the steps. I stood in the kitchen and closed my eyes. I could hear Marisa laughing in the old days, a real laugh from early on, before we all started pretending. I could see Caleb at 10, his knees dirty, telling me about a goal he scored on the cracked school field. Memory doesn't ask permission. It arrives and leaves like the weather. I let it pass through me, and then I said, "Thank you," to the space that had held so much. I locked the door and slid the key across the counter for the new caretaker. When I stepped off the porch, I didn't feel pulled back. I felt pushed forward. On the first warm Saturday in April, I went to the park with a travel mug of coffee and a paperback in my pocket. I watched a father teach his daughter how to ride a bike. He jogged behind her with a hand on the seat, running shoes slapping the pavement, breath puffing. "I've got you," he said again and again. When he let go, she wobbled, almost tipped, then straightened and pedaled on her own. She didn't look back. He did. He wiped his eyes and laughed. I stood there thinking, that's the whole job. Hold steady, let go. The letting go can be the kindest part. I wrote a check for another $5,000 to the center at the end of the quarter. They invited me to speak at a small event, not a big gala, just a gathering of tutors and students and donors in the back room of a church. I don't like microphones much, so I kept it short. I said, I lost some things this year, and I found better ones. I found out that money is loud and peace is quiet. I found out that blood is one way to build family, and respect is another. I found out I don't need something if it comes with a hook in it. People nodded. One man clapped exactly once and then covered his mouth like he had spoken too soon. We laughed. We ate sheet cake with too much frosting. It was perfect. The legal case moved along like spring mud, slow but sure. The receiver tallied assets. The court scheduled another hearing. I did not attend. I did not need to be a spectator to their consequences. My life was not a courtroom. My life was a kitchen with sunlight on the counter and a plan to be somewhere at 2 o'clock to help a man practice a job interview. I kept my appointments. I showed up. That is how a person builds something that lasts. Some nights I sat in the chair by the window and talked to the air. I don't mind saying that. If it was prayer, then it was prayer. If it were to my younger self, then he needed to hear it. If it were the quiet of the room, then the quiet is a good listener. I finally feel like I live where I live, I said one night, and I laughed at the sideways truth of it. Another night I said, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. I said it again, softer. I have myself. The words sat down beside me and stayed. I kept the line with the past very clear. When people tried to gossip, I let the conversation die on the vine. When a cousin emailed to ask if I'd heard the latest, I wrote back, "I hope they're learning," and changed the subject to the tulips in my window box. When the paper ran a follow-up, I did not click. I knew what mattered, and it wasn't inside a headline. On the first day, I worked with a new student named Roy, who told me he had a court date coming up for something old that had finally caught him. His hands shook. He said, "I'm scared." I told him, "Fear tells the truth too. It tells you to be humble, to prepare, to show up." We practiced the questions he might hear. We practiced how to tell the truth in a steady voice. He left that day with his shoulders a little higher. I watched him go and thought about Caleb and how a person can choose to become different when the world tells him it is time. The letter from the neighborhood association stayed on my table for a week. Then I circled a number and called. A woman answered with a bright voice. "We're planting on Saturday," she said. "We could use someone steady with a shovel." I told her I could do steady. I told her I had a shovel in the trunk of a Honda that has never let me down. She laughed and said, "Then you're exactly who we need." I wrote the time on my calendar and underlined it. Planting is an honest way to enter a new season. By the end of spring, the case against Caleb and Marisa had carved its path. The numbers were ugly. The orders were clear. Restitution schedules, repayment plans, and a list of properties to be sold. The asset freeze had done its job. Money that had tried to disappear reappeared in proper columns. Some people would be made whole, some would not. That is how this world works. I did not cheer. I did not mourn. I let the system do what it was built to do while I did what I was built to do. Get up, make coffee, help where I can, say no where I must, and keep the door of my own heart unlocked for the right kind of knock. I thought of the knock on Christmas Eve more than once as months passed. I thought of how it sounded like a gavel and also like a rescue. It rescued me from being the bank they thought I was. It rescued me from another 10 years of pretending. It rescued me from the lie that blood demands you hand your life over, no matter what it costs. If you had told me a year ago that I would find the sweetest piece of my old age in a second-floor apartment with a view of a park, with a battered car that hums in cold weather, with a stack of library books, and a schedule that includes reading aloud to a man who reminds me of myself, I might have smiled and said I hope so. Now I don't have to hope. I live it. I know what my days are for. Sometimes I make a little ceremony out of simple things. I sharpen 2 pencils and set them parallel on the table before I leave for the center. I fold a dish towel just so on the oven handle. I pour coffee into the same mug and hold it with both hands for a breath before I take a sip. It sounds small. It is big. It means I am here. It means I am the one living my life. It means nobody else gets to spend my peace like it belongs to them. When people ask me what I learned, I tell them this. Family is not a claim, it is a practice. Respect is not a feeling, it is a daily choice. Love without truth is only heat. It does not warm for long. Money is a tool. It is not a measure of character. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors that you can lock at night and still open in the morning for the right knock. And above all, I learned that I am allowed to survive my heartbreak and still be kind. One evening, as the sun slid down behind the cottonwoods and the park grew gold, I stood by my window and whispered, "I finally feel free." I let the sentence hang there. I repeated it, slower. I finally feel free. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. Freedom doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it arrives like the soft thud of mail on the mat, which is what I heard a minute later. I walked to the door and picked up an envelope from the neighborhood association. They were finalizing the spring calendar. They wanted to confirm I could help with the planting near the pond and asked if I might also help organize a little book swap for kids and seniors to sit together and trade stories. I smiled without even meaning to. I could see it already. A long table under the pavilion, paperbacks stacked like building blocks, a sign in thick marker that says, "Take one, leave one," a coffee urn steaming in the corner, a row of benches freshly painted by hands that care. I set the letter under a magnet on the refrigerator where I wouldn't miss it. I said to the empty room, "Yes." It felt like the right kind of promise. I turned off the kitchen light, and the room held a soft glow from the street. The radiator sighed. The night was quiet. I thought of the long road from that Christmas knock to this simple yes. I thought of the lawsuit, the articles, the questions, the panic that belonged to someone else now. I thought of my small routines, the people at the center, the way a crisp page sounds when a new reader turns it. I felt the kind of tired that means you worked at something that mattered. Before I went to bed, I stood one more time at the window and looked out at the park. A couple walked a dog. A teenager jogged with headphones on. A mother pushed a stroller slowly, humming to herself. Ordinary life is moving at its unremarkable pace. It is the most beautiful thing I know. I said, without fanfare, I don't need them anymore. I have myself. I said it once, I said it twice. I let it settle into the walls like the scent of fresh coffee. In the morning, I would brew a pot, lace my boots, toss the shovel into the trunk, and drive to the pond. I would put my hands in the cool earth and press young roots into their place. I would tamp the soil and step back and picture what it would look like in June when the color arrived. I would be one pair of hands among many, working side by side without pretense. That is the ending I chose. That is the future I can live with. And somewhere across town, envelopes still land with a thud, phones still buzz with dates and times, and a judge still sets hearings with the calm hand of the law. That is their world to navigate. Mine is simpler now and truer. If a voice from the past ever calls again, I will wish it well and keep walking. Because the lesson is not just that truth wins. The lesson is that after truth wins, you get to build, you get to plant, you get to be the person you almost gave up on. I switched off the lamp, let the room go dark, and climbed into bed with a book on the nightstand and the letter from the association tucked under a magnet where it would greet me at breakfast. A soft wind came up and rattled the window just enough to make a friendly sound. I closed my eyes with the simple, solid thought that carried me to sleep. The door that matters most is the one I finally closed, and the door I love now is the one opening on a Saturday morning with a shovel waiting by the trunk. I wake up earlier these days, not because I have to, but because I want to. The mornings are quiet in my new apartment, the kind of quiet that feels earned. The place isn't big, maybe worth $200,000 on the market, but it has everything I need. My small living room looks out over a park where the trees bend gently in the wind, and if I open the window just a crack, I can hear the laughter of children on the playground. That sound is better than any television, better than any radio. It is the sound of life going on, steady, simple, free of schemes. After what happened in December, I told myself I wanted to build something different, not grand or showy, but solid. I moved a portion of my savings into a donor-advised fund, about $250,000, earmarked for literacy programs and community education. The rest I placed carefully into bonds and index funds, safe and steady. I had learned my lesson about risk, not just financial, but emotional. No more gambling on people who only saw me as a dollar sign. Weekends became my anchor. Every Saturday morning, I brewed a cup of black coffee, strong and hot, and carried it down to the small meeting room at the library, where a group of us gathered to read with adults who were learning English or relearning the basics of reading after years of struggle. Some were older than me, their hands calloused from decades of work, their eyes bright with determination. Sitting with them gave me perspective. Here were people who had been denied opportunities, who fought for every inch of progress. They didn't care who I was related to or how much money I had. They cared that I showed up, that I was patient, that I treated them with respect. Afterward, I would often stop at a small diner a few blocks away. They knew me there. I always ordered the same thing, tomato soup and a salad with extra bread. The waitress, a woman named June, had a laugh that filled the room, and she never forgot to bring me an extra packet of crackers. That meal, simple as it was, became a ritual of peace. I would sit there with my notebook, jotting down reflections, small thoughts, sometimes just words. Freedom, peace, enough. Those notes reminded me that I had already climbed out of the storm. Of course, news about Caleb and Marisa still reached me. In a town like ours, it always does. Caleb had moved back in with his mother, working odd jobs where he could find them. I heard about stacks of legal papers arriving at her doorstep, piling up like bricks of shame. His lawyer had urged him to settle, to cut his losses before the courts took more than they already had. Marisa fared no better. Her social media pages shut down, comments silenced, but the damage was already done. The district attorney's office continued its investigation into her so-called charity, and families who had donated in good faith demanded their money back. Their life had turned into a scramble of damage control, desperate calls, and public embarrassment. I didn't celebrate their downfall, but I won't pretend I pitied them either. The contrast was too stark. While they spent their days putting out fires, I spent mine walking the park trails, breathing in spring air, noticing the daffodils pushing up through the soil. I had traded conflict for peace, and it was the best trade I ever made. One afternoon, at the community center, an older man I had been reading with looked up from his book and said softly, "Your voice is steady." I paused, unsure how to respond. Then I smiled and told him the truth. It took me 20 winters to find it. And I meant every word. It had taken me 2 decades of loss, anger, betrayal, and finally resolved to arrive at this place of calm. That single sentence felt like a summary of my journey, a reminder that scars can heal into strength. Back in my apartment, I hung my father's old pocket watch on the wall, right above my writing desk. The chain was tarnished, the face scratched, but it still ticked. I wanted it there as a reminder that time is the only thing we can't buy back. All those years wasted in conflict, in waiting for an apology that never came, taught me to treasure the hours I still had. Time, I whispered to myself, is more precious than property. It didn't surprise me when Marisa sent me an email. "We're sorry. Can we talk?" The subject line read. I didn't open it. Caleb followed with a text message. "Dad, I need help. Hi." I stared at that one longer, because part of me, the fatherly part, still twitched with old instincts. But then I remembered the years of silence, the manipulation, the coldness when I had nothing left to give. Forgiveness isn't the same as access. I could forgive them in my heart, but I didn't need to let them back into my life. I deleted the message and went back to stirring my pot of stew on the stove. Standing at Holmes Lake one breezy evening, I leaned on the wooden rail of the bridge and let the cool air brush against my face. The water shimmered with the reflection of the setting sun, calm and sure, not unlike how I felt inside. I whispered aloud, "Every day proves I chose right." The words drifted into the air and disappeared, but I knew they would stay with me. The lessons of all this were not just for me. For parents, I believe the lesson is clear. You cannot buy your children's love, nor should you. Provide, yes. Guide, yes. But do not sacrifice your self-respect to keep them comfortable in their greed. If they turn against you for money, then the problem was never the money, it was their character. For children, I would say this: respect is the inheritance your parents need most from you. Not every parent is perfect, I certainly wasn't, but betrayal over dollars and houses leaves wounds that last longer than any fortune. And as for the modern world, I've come to see how easily people trade integrity for gain. The temptation is everywhere. But integrity, once lost, is nearly impossible to buy back. A small letter arrived in my mailbox not long ago. It was from the Neighborhood Association, inviting me to join a spring volunteer project. Nothing dramatic, planting flowers around the community center, painting benches, pulling weeds. I held the letter in my hand and smiled. It felt like a gentle nudge, a reminder that life still had corners for me to explore, people to meet, good work to be done. I don't need their apology anymore. I have my life back, and I intend to live it fully. When I look at that pocket watch on the wall, I remind myself that the hours I have now are mine alone. They are not for arguments, not for schemes, not for reliving betrayals. They are for coffee at dawn, for laughter in a diner, for steady voices in a community room, and quiet walks at sunset. Family, I've learned, is not only the people who share your blood. It is the people who honor your boundaries, who respect your worth, who stand beside you without calculation. Character is the one inheritance that can never be stolen, and it is the only one that matters in the end. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.